Hey, what is going on everybody, and welcome to Fantasia. For today, we're going to be jumping into another session of Epic 7 out today. Got another balance adjustment preview for you guys. So this time around, we are going to be seeing the adjustments that are being set to release on March 12th. And this is probably the largest balance patch that this game has ever had. As you can see here, we are just looking at the heroes. That's right, just the heroes. On top of that, we have artifacts to boot and effects that are gonna be changed. On top of that, they are also going to be doing some adjustments to how memory imprints work, or at least the values of the memory imprints, right? I'm not gonna read off the list of everything there. You can see it scrolling by, and wow, we are gonna be talking about every little detail here. Jumping right in with top model Luluca, guys. So looking at her, they're gonna essentially rearrange her skills yet again, right? The last balance adjustment they had for top model Luluca, they swapped around where her barrier was, where she gets the attack buff, all that good stuff. Instead of getting a barrier now on her skill 2 and granting an extra turn that way, she actually will boost up the combat readiness of everybody on your team by 20%, right? Essentially allowing her to bridge anyone that comes after, and she already has pretty decent speed, and you can build her as a very fast DPS unit, so that is a great way to open up. But you know, for units that are weak against Celine or any non-attack skill counters, she really wants to be able to one-shot things if possible. And then they've also prepared for that as well, right? So not only does she get an increased speed buff in case you can use her skill 2, right, in the awakened version of the skill, what she'll do is now she gets the barrier on her skill 3, which is kind of nice. In those cases where you don't want a skill 2, you get the protection from attacking, and this scales with an attack stat of herself, right? This is also really good because, of course, you get your attack buff before you attack, and now she'll just defense penetrate by 50%, like base, right? Before, it had to be when your speed is at least twice that of your opponent, you get to defense penetrate by 50%, and that is just something that's really difficult to account for, right? Your opponent's speed, your speed, you can't even see their speed stat, you just see them on the combat readiness bar. So yeah, this is definitely a pretty nice change for the base penetration, and now she scales up with her speed difference up to 100% penetration on that skill 3. And if you guys know top model Luluca's damage, it is already absolutely insane. The fact that she grants herself a speed buff now and then will nuke you based on a speed difference is crazy, especially because again, she's usually built with 300 plus speed, and I am very scared because top model Luluca Cleaves used to be the thing that demolished me a few seasons ago. But she now also has the soul burn here to decrease her skill cooldowns. I think it used to be for increased damage, right? They did decrease the damage overall on this, and you can't increase the damage through soul burns now. So this defense penetration is definitely going to be carrying a lot of work, a lot of weight. The way to kind of counter this though is, again, Empyrean Ilanov does exist, so even if your team is rather slow, if the damage here scales too much off of, if it relies too much on the defense penetration for its damage values, then Empyrean Ilanov will be a decent counter for you slower players that are out there. Alright, moving on, we have Lone Crescent Bellona. Oh man, guys, this is a unit that I've been hoping would come back because her design is absolutely incredible. She's no longer getting immunity on her skill 1, and they're taking away the increased damage on the soul burn here too, right? For her skill 1, now she will basically lifesteal and inflict injury, which is great. You can also double the amount of injury that you deal to your opponent, as well as increase the damage that's dealt with a soul burn. In general, the damage is also going to be increased on her skill 1. It's essentially the only skill that you can use because skill 3 has a relatively long cooldown, and you're probably opening up with it. So this is just great for the longer battles here, and it's awesome to see injury being put on units that are not HP scalers themselves. Fighting injury with HP scalers really sucks. Having an attack scaler like Bellona that can be built bulky is really good. So this is nice to see, especially with so many annoying units running around, right? Genesis Roz and all these other HP scalers that can really decimate you just with their sheer amount of bulk and the ability to just cleave you, right? Like Genesis Roz's skill 3. So this is great. Injury is a really, really good strategy to be using against these bulky bruisers. So I'm glad to see Bellona getting in on that. So the other thing is for her passive. So she used to ramp up like the attack, the damage that she'd do with a skill 1 or a skill 2, the passive proc, right? The AoE attack that you do. You get to stack up 10% attack 5 times. Now, she actually just gets 15% evasion for every ally that's currently on her team. So you can get up to 60% evasion, right? Just by being on a team of 4. In Guild Wars, it's going to be less. It's going to be 45%. So this does mean that even with Setsuka, you don't get max evasion, which kind of sucks, but hey, it's alright. Bellona is still going to be pretty decent with this in terms of survivability. It is RNG, not a huge fan of RNG survivability, but in this case, it's acceptable because you can use other buffers and stuff on her, right? She's not like Bison or Hua Young where you can't buff her or anything like that, right? So this is pretty good. The other thing is her skill 2, the AoE damage, can also inflict injuries up to 15% per hit, and now she boosts her combat readiness by 30% instead of 20. So yeah, this is actually a pretty decent change, I would say. Again, the RNG evasion here, not a huge fan of, but at least they are at least it's better than having no survivability, right, like before. The overall damage of her AoE attack, the skill 2, All Eyes on Me, is also going to be increased. Now, the immunity that we lose in skill 1, which actually would be really nice to have, it's kind of like free run on the skill 1, right? You can't control free run, okay, as long as she keeps skill 1ing, but that is going to be moved to the skill 3. So now she grants immunity to herself for 2 turns, which is kind of nice. She still keeps the vigor, don't worry. Vigor buff for 3 turns, immunity buff for 2 turns. Don't know why the immunity is not also for 3 turns, a little weird, but hey, to each their own. I guess you'll lose your immunity first before you lose your vigor buff. She should be able to have 100% vigor uptime. And then they did decrease the damage that's dealt with her skill 3, so do keep in mind that they do want to encourage you to essentially skill 3, get the vigor buff, and then just spam your skill 1s, right? Over and over and over, skill 1 and skill 2. She is still susceptible to getting controlled. Again, not being able to get the immunity on the skill 1 is a little bit of a bummer, but I'm hoping that the injury and the evasion kind of make up for it, right? The evasion make it arguably like a little bit more difficult for units to stick debuffs on you, even though nowadays a lot of debuffs are kind of inflicted with non-attack skills. Think ML Politis or Swift Flagbearer Sigrid. All right, next up we have Charlotte. Let's take a look at this. Charlotte's getting quite a bit of a glow up here. She is actually increasing fighting spirit by more whenever she attacks, and she also increases her combat readiness by 25%. Now that's something that did not used to be here. Oh, sorry, it got increased from 20% to 25%. It's been a while since I've used Charlotte, but hopefully this will change things. Now, when she doesn't use a dual attack, right, and she has a buff, you actually double the amount of fighting spirit gain. They're really honing in on the fact that she took a long time to ramp up, like several turns, and she would usually just die by then, right? So this is actually really nice to see. 50% fighting spirit with 1 attack is super, super nice. Now, this pairs really nicely with her passive here. So at the start of the battle and the end of the turn, she grants a barrier to herself that's proportional to her attack for 1 turn, which does beef up her survivability, which is really nice. But the other great thing is that whenever she has a buff and she's attacking, she increases damage that's dealt by 50%, and whenever she's attacked, she grants a 50% damage reduction. If this barrier strength is actually really nice in proportion to her attack, this can be really scary because stealth has a 50% damage reduction on AoE attacks whenever someone's stealth, right? So imagine that type of mitigation that's on Charlotte. That's already a relatively beefy unit, right? I think this is actually going to be a pretty interesting change. Now, it is really sad to see that she's not gaining the attack and defense buff here. I don't think she would have been busted with the attack and defense buff along with the barrier that pops up at the end of every turn. But it's good to see that she has a consistent way of buffing herself here, which is kind of nice. And yeah, hoping that her damage is going to be, all right here, right, without the attack buff. But instead of the attack buff, what she's getting is she's getting full defense penetration on the highest defense unit on your opponent's side. The overall damage of the skill is decreased here, but the defense penetration should make up for it and give you overall higher output than previously. So yeah, interesting to see where this leads. Charlotte, if this is really good, if she ramps up her fighting spirit quite fast and she can go for her skill 3, the Vortex, she might be able to burst through, like, boss Arunca teams, maybe, because you have these AoEs that are really strong, right? You're dealing 50% extra damage. I'm hoping that, you know, you can just attack buff through external means. Have an attack buffer on your team is going to be really nice. Actually, she would thrive to have buffers with her, just because of how insane this mitigation is, right? So yeah, I think it could be a good unit to use against Boss Arunca. We'll definitely be testing that out, maybe in like a Guild War or Arena before trying her out in RTA. But I have high hopes because Charlotte is a character that I really do enjoy using. All right, with the changes though, the exclusive equipment's going to change as well. So her skill 1 now is going to deal extra damage, which is by 10%, right? That's one thing that you can choose. And after being attacked, you can increase the combat readiness by 10% is going away, because you're already getting quite a bit of combat readiness through just using your skills, right? Using your skill 1. Now she actually gets lifesteal when using her skill 1. So lifesteal set might be going out the window and honestly just be stacking destruction, right? Stacking Destruction set on her probably be the best way to maximize the damage output that you have, which is actually going to be kind of cool, okay? I can't wait. Now, the question is, do we use Charlotte on a resist build to keep those buffs on her? That will need some testing, all right? Stay tuned for that, by the way. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the testing that we're going to do on these units once they actually get their buffs implemented. So moving on here, we got Tori, and the main issue with Tori is actually her kind of inconsistent damage, right? The turn that you have Cascade, you're kind of nuking something, and then the turn you don't, you just kind of sit there menacingly, right? And then you probably get picked off. So they are reducing the Cascade cooldown from 2 turns to 1 turn. So essentially every turn you can have Cascade, which is wonderful. I think this is a great change, right? Giving her more consistency is fantastic, especially for such a fragile DPS. You should be more of a glass cannon, right? This is cool to see. But now what she's actually getting is an increased hit chance for 3 turns when she uses her skill 3. This is nice because it allows her to fight ice units, which she typically had a huge disadvantage fighting against. Tori in general struggles a lot because the fixed damage that's currently out there in the meta. So many units, right, using the new pursuit set to increase fixed damage even. And so with Maid Chloe and FCC being the only 2 units that can cut down fixed damage with their passives, Tori doesn't really work too well with them. I mean, you can make it work, but generally slower teams running Tori get chipped off much more quickly than if you're slightly a bit more aggressive and tempo based, okay? So that's kind of nice to see that Tori is going to have a chance to gain Cascade rather quickly. All right, moving on, we have Robin with a surprise little buff debut here, I guess you could say. Her soul burn is just going to be decreased by 10 souls. I guess they think that Robin is an absolute perfect unit. Don't know where they're getting that from, but hey, she is decent to use at times with units like Rinnock, for example, with extra turns and stuff. In most cases, I think people just prefer Saria, because Saria is like 10 million times more useful, right? With the invincibility buffs, the attack buffs to the team, and the ability to push up the people in the back line, on top of having the ability to hit evasion units. Robin, on the other hand, detonates burn and bleed. So with 10 souls, you can do that now, which is great. We'll talk about Robin's artifact later, which will spoiler alert, synergize really well with this. It'll give 10 souls when you do an AoE. So when you go for your skill 2, you're going to gain 10 souls, you're going to put the burns on the opponent, then you're going to loop around skill 3, and then soul burn it and just detonate everything at once, right? Could be cool to see. Maybe a bit gimmicky in RTA. Just, I mean, this change is not really needed in RTA, because if you get the burn and bleed frenzy mechanic, the warfare rules, then they're going to detonate at the end of the turn anyway. So something to keep in mind. Next up, another surprise unit here that I did not expect to see is Kise. Again, not a real change here. Soul Burn is, instead of doing extra damage on the skill 1, they're dealing extra damage on the skill 3. And not only that, like their Soul Burn does extra damage, they're just increasing more damage on, oh, sorry, not the skill 3, sorry, the skill 2. It's the AoE attack, Dark Scar. So yeah, she's just gonna be ripping through people with this, actually, because it penetrates defense by 30% and additional 30% when she's stealth. So when she's skill 3s, if you give her a swift attack buff, Kise is still a really strong unit to use with things like Ahmed, for example, right? Ahmed will give the greater attack buff, crit damage buff. You have this Kise coming in that's gonna penetrate your defense by 60%, and now you can soul burn to essentially cleave. That's cool to see, getting, you know, more damage on these cleavers, especially ones that can penetrate defense. She still scales pretty nicely without the defense penetration. She is a very hard-hitting unit, and she has a design that I absolutely love. This might make me build up my Ahmed to test out some Kise shenanigans, at least in Guild Wars, right? That would be so fun to use. All right, next up we have Diene, who I did not expect to see here, because she also relatively recently got buffed, but she does have her issues that basically prevented her from being used in the meta, right? And while I do pick her from time to time, she's just not really consistent. And she's not consistent because she packs no healing, she packs limited cleansing, and anti-crit is good. I actually really like anti-crit, but anti-crit's RNG, right? So it kind of hurts a little bit there. But what's happening here is now with Blessing of the Goddess, this is her skill 2, with the barrier and attack buff, this EE that she used to have is now essentially becoming part of her kit. So she's going to increase everyone's combat radius by 15%. Guess they realized 100% of Diene users use this EE, so why not just give it to her as part of her kit, and then change the EEs for later, right? Saint's Prayer is a skill 3. Now she will replace the critical hit resistance with an increased defense buff. Again, I don't know how to feel about this. It synergizes well with defense penetration resistance, right? It bolsters your defense, your opponent can't penetrate as much, you live longer, and it's more consistent, which I do like. But the thing I like about anti-crit is that Diene was one of the few units that can really buff the team with anti-crit, right? How many other units buff the team with it? Navy Captain Landy at the start of the turn, and what is it? The mad scientist Rose, right? Wretched Rose. She can give it to everyone at the start of the match too. I think that's about it. I'm not sure if there's anyone I'm missing, but anti-crit's a really rare buff, and I would like to see them kind of make this so that your opponent can't crit you, right? Maybe critical hit resistance should be your opponent just can't crit you when you have that buff on. That would make it incredibly nice, but maybe if we're doing that, we gotta make sure we limit the number of units that actually have that, because that's an insane buff. But yeah, still something to keep in mind, right? This is kind of nice to see the change. The main thing with her, though, Diene, is that she is getting a constellation change from Gemini to a Taurus. And if you're not aware of what a Taurus Soul Weaver is like, look no further than one of the best cleave support Soul Weavers in the entire game. And if your mind immediately went, oh god, then yeah, it should have, because it's Ahmed. Ahmed. I'm just going to come out and say it. It's Ahmed, right here. Ahmed is a let me unequip this. She's a 117 base speed unit, okay? Diene, on the other hand, Diene right now, as she stands as a Gemini, if I unequip everything, you can see, she is a 105 base speed unit. So if you took your gear from Diene and just kept it the same, right, and changed the constellation to Ahmed, she's going to be ridiculously fast, especially because she already has an EE that gives 10 speed, just flat out 10 speed, just like Ahmed. So if you've ever fought like 320 plus speed Ahmeds that outspeed Zeos back before he got his buff, then yeah, you can now encounter the exact same thing. The exact same thing, but with Diene. Diene giving defense penetration resistance. It's actually kind of nice, because if your opponent takes Empyrean Ilanov, you're pretty much dead in most cases, right, against defense penetration. So having an option like Diene that's there for you, that you can build fast to go before your opponent, is actually kind of nice for a turn 2 player if you're trying to survive like a massive cleave, or you're anticipating a Genesis Roz coming in with a skill 3 and stuff, right? So I'm liking it. I'm liking this a lot. Alright, these changes are all pretty good for the most part, right? And so Dienne's EEs will follow. The ability to give barrier strength increases is going to be changed to dispel 2 debuffs from all allies when using Blessings of the Goddess. That is huge, by the way. Blessings of the Goddess, by the way, is the skill 2, right? Her skill 3 already full cleansed, right? Dispel all debuffs from all allies. But now her skill 2 can also do the same thing. Sometimes you want to be playing a little bit more aggressive with Diene, and sometimes your opponents will outspeed you and inflict debuffs on your units, right? But if you skill 2 to play aggressively, you can't cleanse. But if you skill 3 to play defensively, you don't get the offensive capability to strike back. So I like that both skills now have the ability to cleanse. That is amazing without having to change her artifacts and stuff, right? Because that's already kind of difficult and to manage, especially depending on what you're picking, right, with her and against. So yeah, that's kind of nice. The other exclusive equipment is also going to change. So this was already incorporated into her skill 2, right? The 15% combat readiness. Now she'll recover health of all allies proportional to their health, basically healing a set percentage of their health when using her skill 3. So she's either has the option of healing or cleansing in her kit. Additional cleansing is always nice. I think the one I'll probably go for will be the skill 2. Makes her so much more reliable, especially because if you're picking her to fight in a long drawn out battle, right? There are artifacts that can help you with healing, so we'll see. We'll see how it goes. This is overall really nice change for Diene. I think she is a big winner for one of these out of this balance patch so far, right? Next up is a limited unit. We have Lethe that is gonna get buffed. And honestly, I'm kind of liking what I see here. So in general, the Call of Abyss damage is decreased. That's her skill 2 that activates the giant octopus thing, the monster in the water, right? That's the Call of the Abyss. The damage is gonna be decreased, which kind of sucks, but she does actually get a flat 10% health increase with a passive, so that's actually really nice. They also removed this condition that she can't stack omens when there's a counter duel or extra attack, so she has to stack omens by herself on her turn using her skills, and that is very difficult to do when you have a unit that can be easily controlled and is not like playing, 320 speed, doesn't have like, combat readiness gaining effects, right? In her kit naturally. So this is really nice. You can now dual attack with her or anything counter, even you can build a counter Lethe, right? And this is actually really nice as well. Yeah, there's so many more build options that are available when they remove that restriction. The other thing is she will now just straight up ignore effect resistance of any target with max health that's lower than her. And this is huge because now she actually will strip buffs fully. Like you can have a 2-turn immunity and she will fully strip those buffs. She'll decrease the buff durations by 2 turns. And really rarely do you have units who, have buff durations for 3 turns. We even see with Crescent Moon Bellona's buff that she only gets immunity for 2 turns, not for 3. Just for 2. They're very stingy with that. And it's to help these units, right, with the decreased buff durations, thrive. Instead of getting full buff strips, we got this. So yeah, this is going to be interesting to see because ignoring the effect res is huge. You no longer need effectiveness. They actually changed her imprint concentration from effectiveness to HP. They're basically telling you stack as much HP on her as possible and either play slow with counter or you're going to play fast. Right? If you play fast and you want to ignore the effect res on your opponents, you can inflict frostbite and restrict, which is huge for Lady of the Scales teams, for example, right? If you have Lethe go, maybe after your opponents go, right? You can inflict the frostbite restrict. You can also have her go before your opponent, right? Before Lady of the Scales and all that stuff. Just inflict the frostbite and restrict, push up your team, and just go cleave. Kind of like what Ron does, but the difference between Lethe and Ron here is that Ron needs a soul burn. Lethe here technically doesn't, as long as you have more HP than your opponents, right? And that's not that hard to do with an imprint concentration and with a 10% just HP increase. Kind of wild. I would love for her to be viable. We're definitely going to need a test, especially with that Call of the Abyss damage that's decreased though. We'll see how it plays out. Okay, next up is a unit that I think the community all agrees that was absolutely useless upon release is Birgitta. Birgitta is getting just a really minor change, though. I don't really understand. But she's gaining a swift attack buff on her skill 3, right? That dispels 2 debuffs from an ally. She'll give them the swift attack buff and then increase combat readiness by 50%. It's nice for, like, pushing up a slower DPS unit, I guess, but maybe I'm just not seeing the units that she can combo well with. Why would you use Birgitta over Ahmed would be my question in this case, right? I guess Birgitta does have the ability to play with this, right? The Nothing Personnel kid, where you dispel all buffs from an enemy, and then you inflict bind and block for 2 turns on them. Bind and block are nice, and she is the original unit to have block before Witch of the Mirror Tenebria just took over the debuff meta. But on a 4-turn cooldown, it's very long. She's rather squishy. She has nothing here to really keep her alive. I don't think this is going to push her into viability. Just my personal opinion, personal experience with using her in the past. I don't think this is what she needs to be viable. I think she needs a little bit more. But maybe more is coming along the way. Who knows? Maybe there's something like artifacts and stuff that are going to be released that can help her out a little bit. I just fail to see how she's going to be viable with just a swift attack buff and like a 1-turn decrease cooldown, right? All right. Anyway, next up we have Zeno. Guys, they're really putting a lot of attention on Arena lately. So Zeno here is one of the units that you can purchase for free. You can get him for free, and they completely reworked him. I'm not even gonna talk about his old kit here. Now what he does is he inflicts frostbite for a turn. Okay, and he'll increase damage now proportional to his defense instead of HP. You can soul burn him to grant an extra turn, which is actually really important to note for the next part here, right? At first I saw this and I was like, oh, okay, the reworking Zeno, he's kind of useless here, right? He's gonna be useless, but he is now going to, just with a passive, decrease the enemy's evasion by 50%. You can just have him sit on a team and Setsuka can't dodge anymore. That is absolutely amazing, guys. Absolutely amazing. Now, here's the thing with the soul burn on the skill 1, right? At the start of the turn, when an opponent is inflicted with frostbite, he grants rage and increased defense to the caster for 2 turns. So you skill 1, you soul burn it, take the extra turn. Right, you frostbite on somebody, you'll get rage and increased defense. Now you can skill 3. Your skill 3 is an AoE that dispels 2 buffs before inflicting rupture and cannot buff for 2 turns. The damage dealt increases proportional to his defense, so he's scaling with defense yet again. This is after increased defense buff though and rage, so keep that in mind. Rage gives, I think, attack and speed, so it's pretty good. And when he has rage, he will now ignore effect resistance. This is really synergetic, really nice to see, and I believe what the purpose of this is to essentially nuke a unit, nuke multiple units. I think Zeno could actually be a really good cleaver here for Arena. If you're running Hecate, right, to stop Lady of the Scales from giving the immortality to the frontline unit, and you run Zeno could technically, it depends on how well he scales with this defense here. If you're fighting like a Setsuka, Lady of the Scales, like Genesis Roz type of team or whatever, right? Use your frostbite to make a unit not have damage sharing effects and stuff applied to them. Then what you do is you just skill 3, you nuke the entire team. That unit will probably die from the damage, assuming he has actual good stats here and good damage multipliers. And then the other units will share damage with whoever's in the front, right, of Lady of the Scales. They're going to take all that damage, and if you have a Katie, they can't revive. Zeno ideally could be like a 2-for-1. With just his soul burn on the skill 1 and then attacking with a skill 3. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that his multipliers are actually going to be usable. But again, we'll have to see him practice, right? Definitely going to be picking up a copy of him now. Never actually purchased one because he's never been good. Okay, next up is Vildred. Vildred is gonna get kind of a closer Charles says kind of true. I guess it's more comparable to says, right? Says will attack after someone drops below a certain amount of HP. So after an ally attacks, when the enemy health is 50% or less, he'll activate his skill 2, the passive Dancing Blade. And Dancing Blade will attack everybody, and it also, I should look at the Awakening one. He grants a increased attack to 2 turns, and then activates Dancing Blade. He'll increase combat readiness by 20%, and he deals damage proportional to his speed stat, which is amazing, right? I think his skill 3 already does that, so this is a good bonus, extra damage right here. I know it says damage dealt decrease, but that's the base damage. He's probably going to get a nice speed multiplier here, and the fact that he gets an attack buff here before attacking is also wonderful. The Dancing Blade is now going to have a cooldown because of how it activates now, and it's going to have a 2-turn cooldown, so you can't use it every turn, but I think 1 turn might be enough. And with that, he actually gets all 3 of his EEs absolutely nuked and changed. So his first effect now increases combat readiness by an additional 5%, which is fine. 20 to 25% is a reasonable jump, right? 5% is a lot when you're dealing with high base speed units on a cleave team, right? 320 plus speed in some cases. His skill 2 resets skill cooldowns when defeating an enemy with Blade Ascent. Blade Ascent is his skill 3. Which is kind of nice. It's kind of like nuking with... Gosh, I can't think of it off the top of my head. There's a unit that can skill 3 like every single turn, essentially. So that's also kind of good to see as long as they kill. Oh, Specimen Says. That's what I want to say. Specimen Says. Kind of like Specimen Says. Exclusive equipment-wise, the third option grants increased critical hit damage to the caster for 2 turns before using a skill effect when using Blade Ascent. So when you go for the skill 3, yeah, you already have an increased attack buff. You're going to get an increased crit damage buff. That's going to be really nice. And when you see the changes to buffs later, you'll see that it makes Vildred actually a lot easier to build, too. Okay, moving on, we got Arowell. I'm going to skip Arowell, and we're going to talk about her specialty change, which is the one that most people are going to be using here. Unbound Knight Arowell. So whenever an ally except her was attacked, she had this kind of Helag Lance effect, a weaker version of it, and it boosted herself by 10%. Now she's going to increase her combat readiness by 20%, and when she's skill 3s, she's now also going to give everyone a defense buff for 2 turns, making everyone a lot more resilient. This is nice because I'm assuming from the rest of the design here that we'll talk about that they really want you to build a base speed, really high HP Arowell, right? So increased defense is going to make everyone really bulky. It also makes it so they take less damage, which is good for her. If you don't know, Arowell has an Escort buff, and Escort absorbs 30% of all damage that your teammates take. So it's a stronger Aureus that's on your team, right? She's one of the best damage sharing mitigation units that are in the game. So this increased defense buff is really good for her, actually, to keep her alive, because everyone else is taking less damage overall. A couple changes to runes. Now she has a 100% chance to recover HP by 10% whenever she uses her shield thrust instead of 5%, again, helping her stay alive. And percentage-wise, again, you want to stack as much max HP as possible, so you get as much healing as possible. And at the start of the first battle, you have a 100% chance to increase effect resistance proportional to the caster's max health. This surprised me, because this is basically what ML Aria's passive is. When you get this increased effect res, it basically means you don't have to build effect res on her, like, at all, if it's scaling really well. Like, if you stack a bunch of HP, let's say 30, 35k HP, and let's say ML Aria, I think, scales 60 or 70% effect res, right, for every 10k HP she has. I think it's 70%. So if she has something very similar, yeah, you with like 30k HP, you're already at, what, 200 plus resistance. I think you're going to be fine. So building base speed counter Arowell to heal up a bunch of HP is maybe the way to go. Yeah? Definitely something to consider. Last thing is, whenever you ran her with light units, she gave a giant barrier to them at the start of the battle. Yeah, no, that is going to be changed to all allies at the start of the battle. So Arowell might actually see some play as a really strong damage mitigation knight that comes back into the meta. And it's probably going to annoy me a little bit because she used to trigger me all the time. She used to be so strong. It was insane. Okay, next up for specialty changes, I think this one is maybe a little less PvP focused. I'm not sure who's going to be using Roozid. He is a speed imprint though, keep that in mind. I believe he's a speed imprint. I should fact check myself actually. But if I remember correctly, he's a speed imprint. But Roozid here actually has damage dealt increased on his skill 1, which is fine. And then he also has a higher chance to put the decreased attack for 2 turns. And they they increased the cooldown, but they made it do more damage, and you can soul burn it for more damage. I think they're trying to change him into like a more DPS-y-ish role, but he also has a really good opening skill now. He used to not have this extra turn here. You have to soul burn for it, right? And soul burning for an extra turn just feels bad on an opener, so they're just gonna give him the free extra turn now that he can boost up everyone's combat readiness by 25% with his skill 3, and he'll also give everyone increased speed for 3 turns, so that's also kind of nice. Again, I don't know if this is more for like a PvE type thing, right, with an expedition or a hunt or something like that, or if this is like has some PvP applications. Like, I don't think Roozid has been relevant in PvP since the inception of the game. Like, back then he was actually used a lot, but now not so much. They did increase the cooldown for his skill 3, but not like it matters. If you're playing aggressively with him in PvP, then yeah, he's probably not going to need that second skill 3, right? You're just taking the first turn, you're winning. They did change his constellation as well, which is okay, and gave him a bit more speed, which is also kind of nice. He has decent base speed, actually, pretty good base speed. And then one of his runes was changed to also give 100% chance to grant attack for 3 turns, right? Instead of increased combat readiness of the slowest people on your team by additional 5%. So that's actually kind of nice. And yeah, that's pretty much about it for Roozid. He got more consistent as well with the combat readiness decrease on his wind slash. But yeah, let me know if you guys use Roozid or anything like that. I don't think he's really gonna be used in PvP, but this might be a pretty decent one for buff for PvE. Okay, that's it for the heroes, but let's go ahead and talk about artifacts now. A couple artifacts got adjusted here. One is an Assassin's Pledge. This is Robin's artifact, right? So they're getting rid of the effectiveness that they give through the artifact, and instead it says after using an attack that is AoE, you'll gain 10 souls. The burn is still something that you have to increase the artifact level for to get more consistent, but honestly, the fact that this 10 souls right here means it doesn't matter if you land this extra burn. This is huge, right? Providing souls to soul burn for yourself, making yourself sufficient. Robin's weakness was that, honestly, you never used her, because even if you ran a Rinnock or whatever, a unit with extra turns, if you didn't run a mage, you're kind of screwed. You can't soul burn, right? So this makes her a bit more self-sufficient, which is awesome. And yes, the restriction of souls only being acquired once, perfectly fine, perfectly in line with all the other artifacts that do the same thing. Next up is Tyrant's Descent. Tyrant's Descent is gonna be, what's his face? I don't have him. Kane's artifact. Kane's artifact is actually not bad because they're just increasing the damage here. So now you have 8 to 16% extra damage when attacking, just base, right, which is actually really good damage overall. At plus 15, it's going to be 12%, and you can stack up damage 4% for every debuff your opponent has, up to 24 to 32%. So essentially, you get max damage against something that has 4 debuffs. This is a really decent artifact, actually, for PvE content, stacking debuffs on a boss and then just smacking them for a ton of damage. This is actually kind of nice. Do like seeing stuff like this, right? Making PvE a bit more accessible and making it easier to take down big bosses like in expeditions and such. Okay, next up, unprecedented, guys. We got some more buff adjustments here, right? I think we've had a couple of these before in the past, but not to this scale. So first up, we have increased critical hit damage going from 50 to 70%. This is what I mean by like Vildred getting that buff. You don't need to build as much crit damage on these units. You know, people used to build up to 300, right? Because if Ahmed gave you a crit damage buff, you're capped at 350. Keep in mind that these buffs that you get, the visible buffs that are above your unit's head, they don't go over the cap, and crit damage cap is 350. Now you can build your units with, you know, 280 crit damage, meaning you have that extra 3 rolls that could have gone to crit damage that can now go elsewhere into like speed, for example, or attack, and you can get more damage or more utility out of your units that way. That's amazing. Alright, next up we have Escort. Escort buff is the one I talked about for Arowell. Now instead of 30% damage share, you're going to have 40% damage share, which is, again, why I think they really want you to build base speed Arowell. I don't think they want you to build speed boots on her. She's probably going to need the HP boots with how much damage she is sharing here. This is insane, right? This is a lot of damage that's being shared. Lady of the Scales shares 70% of the damage, I believe it is, but 40% is encroaching on that territory. Teams with her are probably going to be very hard to deal with. Alright, next up, we have a couple of debuffs getting buffed as well. So not just buffs, right? Burn and Bleed, because Smallgate for some reason loves Burn and Bleed. This pretty much guarantees with this damage increase on both of them that they're probably going to be a warfare mechanic again next season, which is just awful. Smallgate needs to stop doing that. Just replace Burn and Bleed, at least in the warfare rules, right? Make them better as standalone debuffs, but gosh, can we please replace that warfare rule? It's absolutely useless. Alright, moving on. We got what I think is probably the single most interesting buff to a buff, or debuff in this case, that we've seen. Curse is now going to be dealing damage to whoever has it, not but just by single attacks onto other units. Any attack, including AoEs, 60% of that damage is going to go to whoever bears the curse. That is wild. The reason why it's wild is because now if you, let's say you inflict curse on any unit, right? Just go in with a cleave, just an AoE, and boom, whoever had that curse is gone. Gonzo. I know Melissa has curse, for example, and Abigail also has it too, I believe. I can guarantee you, I think they're setting up for another curse unit to get released, right? And if they have any really fast, reliable curse dealers, it's gonna be bad because you can spread curse. I tried it in the video where we were testing out Roozid, who has spread. And spreading curse is going to be insane. If everyone has curse and you AoE, everyone takes 60% of the damage that all the other units take. So you essentially just multiply your damage multiple fold. This is a crazy, crazy debuff now with spread. Keep in mind, with spread. And I think people really need to watch out for it when we inevitably, I think we're about to get a unit that has curse. So keep that in mind, right? All right, moving on to the last part of the video, guys. I don't think we've ever seen this before. So a memory imprint balance adjustment here, right? Now, I'm not going to read over every little thing. We're basically just going to cover most of the 5-star stuff, and the 4 stars follow suit for the most part. For imprints, imprint concentrations, this is self-imprinting, right? Putting the stats onto yourself. All the imprints here, from B to triple S, all have increases in how much we're getting. So if you have a triple S unit, you're getting just 3% extra stats, which is wild, right? This is gonna screw over a lot of people's builds, especially in terms of like crit rate and stuff with overcapping, right? Certain stats. This will free up stats for you to stack elsewhere as well if you're trying to min-max your builds. So this is really nice. Attack defense HP, you're essentially getting like a 1 to 3%. As you go up, it goes higher, but like a 3% boost at every stage, which is wonderful. Then we have crit rate. So crit rate no longer has this super annoying decimal that's there. There's no longer a 0.2% that my Charles is gonna not crit now, which is amazing. I don't know why they've ever did this before in the past, but now, guys, look how clean it is, right? From 6 to 9 to 12 to 15 to 18, it's just incremental, beautiful. I'm loving it. Yeah, this is the one that people are definitely going to be using to min-max here. You might have been overcapped, or you might already be overcapped to avoid the 0.2. Now you're going to be overcapped by a little bit more, and so you can free up maybe a crit roll into something else. So kind of nice to see. I'm definitely going to tweak a lot of my builds now, that's for sure. Effectiveness and effect res, the max is actually not changed for this, keep that in mind. But every other incremental change here, they just kind of distribute it a little bit better. So effectiveness and effect res doesn't really get a buff from this. Dual attack chance, though, got a huge glow up, guys. I don't know who has a self-imprint dual attack chance, but whoever does is eating good. And I honestly hope that they remove random dual attacks from the game and then just like just make Unity set absolutely goated, right? That whenever your opponent dual attacks, you're gonna know, oh, they're running Unity. That's kudos to them, right? I would love that. I would love to see that. Okay, moving on though, the 4-star stuff is basically all the same, right? Just to a lesser extent. You can see that with the 4-star changes here, like they're really only just rounding out the values. They're not giving extra value to the units, right? Same thing with the 3 stars. They're changing some of the values, but you don't see like extra, right? They're just rounding up. So 11.2 is 12. It's not like 14% crit or anything like that. Effectiveness, effect res still capped, and dual attack chance essentially got doubled here, which is, again, good to see. Okay, moving on though with the imprint release, the last little bit that we got here. Imprint releases are huge, right? They play a large part. If you guys ever watch me play RTA, the imprint releases for the team matter a lot for how you navigate your opponent's team. If I'm trying to bulk up and I have 3 units that can team imprint for 12% HP onto every unit I have, guys, that's a ridiculous amount of HP that I've just added to the team, right? Threefold, right? This is not just 1 unit. This is team imprint. To every unit, you get 12% more. Now, the 4-slot versus 2-slot. 2-slot is for those units that only imprint units in 2 positions on your team formation. These were always going to be higher than the 4-slot imprint. So concentrated here, right, we see it is a bit higher, which is, again, really nice to see. But this will also screw with people in builds. So when you go into battle and, you know, maybe previously you saw like a 40 KHP Alencia and you're like, oh, well, that's scary. And then now you're going to go in and it's a 42 KHP Alencia. Like, it's going to get to ridiculous levels, right? So, again, keep that in mind when you're team building and you're in RTA. You can change your imprints before going to battle. And you see me shift around those imprints a lot myself. Right, but yeah, we're not going to go over all the 4-star and 3-star changes. Overall, it's a positive. I'm liking this. And yeah, that is the balance adjustment, guys. I'm so sorry the video had to be so long, but there's so many units that got changed, and I wanted to make sure I gave you guys a fair breakdown of every unit, just in case you're curious about them, how they work, what is good, what is bad about the changes. I think overall it's a net positive. The only thing I have to complain about this is that they changed the constellations for several units, but guess who they did not change constellations for? Yeah, that's right, Charlotte. You know what Charlotte awakens into? Crit rate. You know what she does all the time? She guarantees crit. She guarantees crits whenever she lands attacks. So, that is fun. Good job, Smilegate. But maybe next patch, Charlotte will get a better constellation. With that being said, though, guys, let me know who you think your favorite buff here is in the comment section down below, and I will catch you in the next one. Take care.